Like Lizzie said, my name's Melissa. I'm a social worker by training. I live in DC, so Capitol Hill Village is my village. And I work at the Wendt Center for Loss and Healing. We're a small nonprofit. We've been around 51 years, and our focus is solely on grief, loss, and trauma. So we provide individual and group mental health care to kids 5 and up, all the way through our senior citizens who are navigating difficult life moments. And we do that through both in person at our offices, which are located just on the Red Line and Van Ness across from UDC, as well as via telehealth. And then we provide a variety of other services in the community. Most of those are focused on kids. We're in DC public and public charter schools doing grief and trauma groups. We have our grief camp in the summer for kids ages 6 to 18, which is also located on Capitol Hill. And then we have our family camps, which are here in our office, as well as virtual for families that are navigating grief. Part of what our founder, William Wendt, wanted to do when he first founded the St. Francis Center, which is what we were first called before we renamed ourselves for him, was to increase people's language and understanding of what grief is. He was an Episcopal priest in Palisades, and he founded the St. Francis Center in Palisades. Actually, his church, I think, was DuPont Circle, but the first iteration of our organization was in Palisades. And he recognized that while he was supporting his parishioners who were grieving, and he was actually visiting a dear friend of his whose partner had just died, he was kind of left without words. He's like, I'm a trained clergy and I don't know what to do. And so he really dove deep into thanatology, which is the study of death and dying, and really wanted to gain language and understanding, and then made it his life's mission for the second half of his life to increase people's understanding and comfort and capacity to sit in grief. And he did it in some pretty unique ways. He would hold, grief conversations in people's homes where people built their own coffins and then used them as furniture in their homes, as bookcases and trunks and, armoires. And he was like, grief is now in the home. We're going to talk about it. And so he was kind of a radical guy. We're not in the coffin or furniture building business anymore, but we still do believe that grief is a conversation that we should be having. And that if we have a bit more comfort with language and an understanding, then we can show up and reduce some loneliness and isolation that people who are grieving often feel. So I have some visual slides because I know that I'm a visual learner, and so I like to make sure that I provide visual anchors for people. I will make sure Lizzie gets these and can send them out when she's got the recording available. And so you guys will have these, so don't feel like you need to take copious amounts of notes or write anything down because you'll revisit them. But I do like to remind people, and my dad, who is 86, reminds me regularly that not everybody talks about grief every day, Melissa. Not everybody is comfortable with that language. So a little disclaimer here that we're going to be talking about grief, and it can bring up your own responses, your own stories. We are human beings with, years and years of stories and experiences that inform how we show up and sit in spaces. And so I just want you to have permission to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. That could be getting up and moving with your screen on or your screen off. It's all good. Make sure you've got some water and that you're just listening to your bodies. Okay. As Lizzie said, feel free to ask questions. Feel free to drop it in the chat. Feel free to unmute and ask questions. Happy to go where we need to go tonight. But I'm going to start with to give you a pathway. I'm going to start with some information, some language, some education around grief, what it is, the expansiveness of grief, as well as we're in the second half, we'll kind of get into like, great, so what do I do? How do I tend to myself? How do I talk about this with other people? What can I say and what can I do? Okay, so that's a little bit of our pathway today. So I'm going to start with this expansive definition. When we say the word grief, we often think of death-related losses. Those are the most commonly thought of grief experiences. But grief is really anytime we experience a change with a loss, we have a grief experience. Now, some of those we can think of pretty readily, and others are somewhat more surprising, and maybe society um, uh, doesn't name them as grief experiences. So we think about change plus loss is a grief experience. Death-related losses, like I said, are the most commonly thought of ones, but we can also experience it with moving homes, divorce and separation, launching children to college or into adulthood, when your relationship with them will change and you won't see them in the same way day in and day out. Moving from independent living to assisted living or supportive living, having family move, deployment with the military, incarceration is certainly a grief experience. And two that kind of come to mind that society often doesn't label a grief experience, but are first is graduations. We are in graduation season right now, and graduation from elementary school, middle school, high school, college is a grief experience. It's a celebration, one with joy over what's been accomplished, but it's also that idea of I'm leaving this place that's known me and I'm going into this new space where they don't know me as well. The other one that society doesn't label all that often is retirement. Retirement is a grief experience. It can be joyous, something you've worked hard for and celebrated, but it also impacts a sense of loss of identity, loss of routine and environment, a loss of connection. And so society is celebrate. You tell people like I'm retired and they're like, this is amazing. What are you doing with all this time you have? That can be an overwhelming question, right? Suddenly you're like, I don't know, who am I? What am I doing? What's my purpose and my passion and my sense of who I am now? And so recognizing that grief really does fall under this larger, there's a larger umbrella of grief, and we want to be able to name all of those so that we can honor those experiences and not dismiss them or minimize. Okay. And I'm sure there's others that you can think of, and you can again feel free to drop those in the chat or share those as well. The last thing I'll say here is that grief is about a relationship, and relationships are complicated, right? Relationships are complicated. So grief is about the relationship we have with someone or something or a pet that is no longer present in the same way, either emotionally or physically. And so understanding that the relationship is what we lean into when we talk about with grief work a fair bit. Okay. So we're going to talk about some specifics related to grief under this larger umbrella of this definition. I will give you some book recommendations later on. There's been some really incredible books that have been written, but here's a few quotes that I love. Megan Devine wrote "It's Okay, You're Not Okay," which is on my book list for you all. She writes, "Grief is seen as a kind of malady, a terrifying, messy emotion that needs to be cleaned up and put behind us as soon as possible." Right? And May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And in the spirit of that, part of what we talk a lot about at the Wendt Center is that life gives us hard things. We encounter hard things. To live in relationship means that eventually that relationship will end in its physicalness, either by choice or by death. And so we need, the more we can increase our comfort to sit in hard spaces, the better equipped we are to navigate these difficult life events that we are encountering. Robert Niemeyer talks about grief chooses us. It's the tax we pay for loving. The thing that I think is really important and that I talk a lot about with people is that grief is not something that we fix. It's not a solution-based problem. In fact, it's not a problem. It's something that is carried. It's something that's integrated. It's something that we learn to live with. And the work of Lois Tonkin really leans into this. In the 90s, she first talked about this idea of existing and learning to live with grief, and that grief is not something we get over. And this image, somebody created these images, to bring to life her work around this. And I really appreciate the mason jar image in particular. So the top image of the mason jars has 3 mason jars of the same size. In that first mason jar, there's a black ball. That black ball represents grief. The idea is that when a loss event happens, it takes up all of our space, our brain space, our body space, our emotional space. It fills us up. And this first image shows that over time, the mason jars stay the same size and grief gets smaller and eventually shrinks and disappears. That's not actually true. What we know to be true is the bottom image. Again, mason jar, that first mason jar, grief takes up our whole space, our whole emotional, physical, kind of cognitive being. And then over time, the mason jars grow, meaning our lives grow around grief. Now, if I was a graphic designer, which I'm not, I'm a social worker, but if I was a graphic designer, I would change that ball. I would make it maybe a different color or different shape or different texture, so that it looks different, because grief does look different over time. It doesn't look the same. And what we know is that something can happen, a death anniversary date, a significant day, a significant milestone, the first hot day, the first day of an ice cream cone, a variety of things can happen. And we can go right back to that first mason jar where it consumes us and it takes up all of our space again. And then again, as the days pass, our lives grow around grief. Now, the reason why I love this in particular, and it resonates with me, is this means that I don't have to forget my people, right? I can remember my people. I can bring them with me. That first image, the top image, means my grief goes away, which means I forget. And the bottom image means that I bring my person with me. Now, I really wish they would be here physically with me, but when they can't be, I can still bring them in a new way. Grief ends a life, it doesn't end a relationship, or death ends a life, it doesn't end a relationship. And so we redefine that relationship over time. And so building on that, I often use this imagery or metaphor of an ocean, that grief is like an ocean. And some days we go to the ocean and it's the picture on the left, and we're standing there, our feet are firmly planted in the sand and the water's lapping up around our ankles, and we feel comfortable and confident and grounded and safe in that space. And we can see the horizon and our grief is almost peaceful. Other days we go back to that same spot and the ocean looks like the picture on the right. It's ferocious. The sand is shifting out from under our feet, and we no longer feel steady. We no longer feel like we're going to be able to stay upright. And if I get pulled under, I'm not sure I'm going to get my head above water again. And that's when we look for our lifeguards and we look for a life preserver and our people to hold us up. And grief can shift and change, just like those mason jars. That picture on the right is that first mason jar where it's consuming all of us. And then those other mason jars where grief is growing around, our lives are growing around the grief, is that image on the left. And we can, in the beginning, our grief feels more like that picture on the right sometimes. And then we kind of develop this relationship with our grief, and it starts to feel more like that picture on the left. But again, out of nowhere, that picture on the right can happen, and it can shift and change and feel overwhelming. And that's because it's moving. We're always growing with our grief, and it shifts and changes as our lives shift and change. Okay. So hopefully those metaphors give you a little bit of context or language or an understanding of this idea that grief is not something we get over and move on from. It's not this linear process, something to accomplish and clean up and put behind us, but it's something that actually we learn to exist with. And so in that spirit, these are some common misconceptions that we have and that we know about here at the Wendt Center about grief. And they're common misconceptions because people believe them to be true for everybody. Some of these might resonate for you and you might feel them true to you, and that is fine. But they are not universal, meaning that everybody experiences these. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm just going to name a few of them. That first is that linear stage-based process. Many people have heard of the stages of grief, or Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote the book On Death and Dying when she was working with the terminally ill. And then she wrote On Grief and Grieving because the bereaved really latched on to this idea that there are things I should do to accomplish and to feel better. And so they latched on to this stage-based process, which is, denial and anger and bargaining, right? And you move through these stages. What we know to be true and what she actually confirmed prior to her death is that it's not clean and linear. It's actually really messy. And we can be, we can move through, we might experience bargaining and denial and depression and anger and acceptance. We might move through these stages, but we can kind of bounce back and forth all over the place. So we can be 5 years out, 10 years out, and be right back in denial, where we think we hear the garage door opening or the front door opening, and we're like, oh my gosh, in my person's home, or I see my person, and we kind of feel caught off guard by that experience because we think, oh, we're good, we've accepted this, we've moved on from this, we're good. And it's just messy because human relationships are messy and grief is messy. The other two that I want to name here is the idea that the first year is the hardest. When people talk to me about that, my answer is maybe. Maybe it is, because you're experiencing all those first, the first Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, holiday celebrations, first day of summer. And maybe it's not. Maybe the second year is the hardest, because in the first year people remember and they call you. They say, oh, Father's Day is coming, let's do something together. And then the second year they're like, you've done one, you're good, you got this. And so the second year can feel lonely. Or maybe it's the fifth year because you never thought you'd hit 5 years without your person. And so just understanding that the first year might be the hardest, but it might not. It's a very individual experience. And then the other is that if you're crying, you aren't grieving. And, grief encompasses many different emotions. Sometimes sadness is the primary one. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's anger or confusion or guilt. Sometimes it's relief. We don't talk about relief a lot, but sometimes it's relief because I'm no longer caretaking or my person isn't in a lot of pain. And so there's a whole host of emotions that we experience. Okay. So I like to dismantle some myths and some misconceptions so that we can open the door to the expansiveness of the experience. Along those lines, these are some common grief symptoms that we have. Again, this is not a list in totality, meaning if it's not up here, it's not a grief symptom. But these are some of the more common ones, and we put them into some categories. So the first is behavioral. The number one and number two symptom that we hear from people who are grieving are disruptions to sleep and appetite, meaning I'm having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or both, or I'm having a decrease or an increase in appetite. That is the number one and number two symptom that we hear from people. It's pretty common and pretty universal. And you might not experience the disruptions in sleep immediately after the loss event, but it can come later on. And again, that does not, just because it's one of the most common, does not mean everybody experiences it. Okay. The cognitive ones are ones that I like to talk about a lot. There's a brilliant book by Mary Frances O'Connor called The Grieving Brain, and she studies grieving brains. And she has been able to name and describe and ground in science the cognitive disruptions that we have when we're grieving. What we hear from people and what we know to be true is that our brains struggle to fully wrap our heads around what has happened. And so we actually have to create new neural pathways and new kind of brain systems to understand that our person isn't coming back to us in this physical life. And this process can actually impact our cognitive functioning early on in grief. And we find that many people experience forgetfulness. I hear a lot, I locked myself out of my apartment. Oh my gosh, I can't remember a password. I walk into a room and I don't know why I'm in the room. And now that happens to me normally, but it's exacerbated, beyond what a normal forgetfulness is. We also hear difficulty concentrating and some disorganization. People say, I sit down to read a book and I can't track it, or I'm listening to a podcast and I'm not paying attention, or I can't get through a show. And so those cognitive impacts are really important to understand. And so with that, what we tell people is let's scaffold. And so scaffolding is stuff that, right, we build to help us reach higher places on the outside of a building or a house. And I talk about scaffolding as a way to support. So this is where we have sticky notes. Sticky notes are like your best friend. Sticky notes by the door. Do you have your keys, your wallet, your phone, your dog? Did you turn off the oven? Did you turn off the lights? And on the bathroom mirror, you have an appointment today. Don't forget to call this person. Maybe you're taking a notebook with you when you're going places to write it down, or you're taking another person to be another set of ears. So we really want to think about scaffolding to be able to help us when we're impacted cognitively. The emotional symptoms are ones that we think about a lot, crying easily, but we also experience irritation. People get real prickly. Small things kind of get under our skin and irritate us. And some people get numb, which is fine. And again, there's a whole host of emotions that people experience. And then finally, the physical. Let me qualify this or preface this by saying if you have an underlying health condition, grief can exacerbate it. If you have high blood pressure, grief can make your blood pressure go up. If you have diabetes, it can impact your diabetes because your immune system is directly linked to your emotional functioning. And so if you have an underlying condition, you need to go to the doctor and talk to your doctor and say, I'm grieving. This just happened. Can we monitor my health? If you experience new physical symptoms that are out of the ordinary, go to the doctor, but also tell them that you're grieving so they can take that into account. But we do see unexplained body pains. We see headaches. I'm a headache person. I get headaches. And so headaches are usually a sign that something's going on for me. And then some people get GI disruption or upset stomachs. Okay. So lots of things that people are experiencing. And so again, making sure that you're talking to your doctor. All right. This is this last little piece about the grief psychoeducation or understanding grief before I shift into the what do I do about it. And I think this is important to understand that grief is often experienced and expressed along a continuum. On the one end of the continuum, we have our intuitive grievers. These are our feelers. I tend to be a feeler. So I'll use we experience grief very emotionally and somatically, meaning it's on our bodies, it's in our emotions. We kind of wear it. You can see it on us, like it's a heaviness. You can see it in the face, you can see it in the posture, difficulty getting out of bed, maybe the blinds are drawn, sluggish. This is how Hollywood depicts grief. If you turn on the Hallmark Channel, this is how Hollywood depicts grief, okay? On the other end of the continuum are instrumental grievers or our doers. These folks tend to process more cognitively, lots of questions, lots of planning, organizing things, gathering people. And they process also physically the doing of things. The example I often use is Susan G. Komen, her family, instrumental grievers. Like there's a big walk for breast cancer, right? That's instrumental grieving. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle, skewing one way or the other, but it is important that we know our style and we know the style of those we're interacting with, either we're living with or who are supporting us. Because what can happen is our intuitive grievers, our feelers, can think about our doers like, why are you being so cold? Something sad happened. You should be sad. And our doers start to think about our intuitive grievers. It's time to get up and get going. It's been a couple weeks. Let's go. Get up. And that can breed and fuel a disconnection, miscommunications, and lack of compassion at the time when we need all of those things. So talk with your folks. It's good conversation over Sunday dinner, right? Like what style of grieving are you? And maybe you have those conversations in your villages about how it's showing up and how you express it. Now, here's the other thing I'll say. And my parents are not on the call. They don't live in DC. So I'm going to use them as an example. My dad is very demonstrative. He makes decisions. He's an intuitive griever. He is deeply feeling lots of tears. My mom is much more passive. She's an instrumental griever. She gets things done. She likes to take care of people and things in a grief setting. So it doesn't fall on gender lines or even personality traits necessarily. So just keeping in mind that what your style is and what the style looks like for those around you. Okay. So that was a little bit about grief. I can talk, Lizzie knows, I can talk for hours about grief, all of the theories and the understanding. And so, at some point in time, I'm happy to go deeper. But I wanted to give you a little bit of the language and provide a little bit of context for what you and those you're around might be experiencing. And then I want to get into like, what do I do about it? Because this is really where I think beauty happens. Healing happens in community, healing happens in connection. We are biologically designed as mammals to be in community and to be with people. And at a time when our world feels broken and crumbling, in those moments of grief, that's when we need our people to show up. And it can be scary to show up. I
I'm
work a
actually
lot with
in this
organizations.
session on grieving.
Um, I work a lot with organizations, with schools, with communities on grief. And people are often like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to make that person upset by bringing it up. I'm afraid I'm going to step in the muck. And my words are always like, step in the muck. If you're grieving, you're not going to remind me that I'm grieving. I'm grieving all the time. And if I don't want to talk about it, we can ask permission, we can ask consent to engage in that conversation, and I'll give you language. But showing up and saying something is a beautiful thing, and it can feel scary. Um, all right, so I've got a poem. It was in the book, which I've got right here. It's on my book list too. Francis Weller, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. I love that book. He's a very thoughtful. They're all thoughtful, but he's just it's speaking to me right now. Let's put it that way. And so in the book, he has a poem which he did not write, but I love this, and it's called "These We Remember." "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch, to love, to hope, to dream, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools, this love, but a holy thing, to love what death can touch. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was a gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death can touch." And I just that spoke to me. It resonates with me. And I think this idea that loving is a risk. It requires vulnerability because we know that it'll shift and change, and the love may not end, but the way the relationship is will, that physical relationship will. And so it just, anyway, maybe it spoke to you the same way it spoke to me. But it's something that resonated about this idea of it being a gift, right? And so here's the challenge. Here's the challenge. We are in a community that likes and rewards fixing, right? I have a leak in my bathroom right now, and I called somebody to fix the leak, right? Your grandchild or your child is struggling in math, you hire a tutor. You need the walk shoveled, you ask somebody to help you. You need a recipe, you ask somebody, or you go to the library, or you look it up on the internet. We've been taught to solve problems. And we've been taught that pain is an indication of something wrong. But here's the thing, there's no solution in grief. There is no solution that's going to change what has happened. And pain makes a lot of sense. Pain is not a problem in grief, right? In life, an upset stomach for a long period of time, we go to the doctor. Your wrist hurts for a long period. I had an elbow pain for a while. I went to the doctor. They gave me a cortisone shot. We got a story about that one that we won't go into now. But, you get a cortisone shot, or you get some medicine, or you go to physical therapy. That pain is a sign that your body's trying to tell you something. Yes, except in grief. The pain makes sense. It's about that relationship. It's about that love. It's about that yearning and that longing. And there's no solution, right? So we have this expectation. I often use this graphic at the holidays, right? We have this expectation for how things are going to look, this expectation that it's going to be this perfect snowman, right? That's like the Hallmark Channel right there. And in reality, the snowmen really look like the ones on the right. So we have this expectation for how retirement will look. And then we have the reality of what it's going to look. We have an expectation for what our grief will look like. And then there's the reality. And so being able to pace and suspend some expectations so that we can be in the now, so we can sit in the now is a really important piece. I have a very short video to show you. Hopefully the sound will work. If not, I've got it pulled up on my browser. It is from Megan Devine, who wrote the book, It's Okay, You're Not Okay. She talks about how to support people. And I just think it's a really beautiful video about that idea of not fixing, not stepping in and trying to solve the problem, the problem or provide a solution. She does reference that she has been studying grief, and she references certain types of losses like death by suicide, baby loss, and traumatic loss. So I just like to give people a heads up that she uses that language very briefly at the beginning. So if that's going to activate you, please do tend to yourselves. And listen for what she's talking about. And I'm always curious. You can always share in the chat or share out loud what resonates with you. All right, so let's see if this plays from here. See how my technology is doing today.
So, what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. It's kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary, everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, "The human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed, exactly as it is." He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up. But here's what we tend to do instead. You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them. Or, you know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off. Or, I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture? We're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. I mean, we try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either, because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. Do you want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
I love that video. I hope it brings some language to that idea that sitting with someone, that idea, kind of the best metaphor example I can give is that, when somebody has this stomach bug, right? Like we can't fix that, but we can bring them chicken soup and ginger ale and tea to tend to the symptoms, to tend to the discomfort. And that's really what she's talking about, is we can't change what happened, and the expectation that we're going to make them feel better is unrealistic, because their person died. Of course they don't feel right. And so sitting, acknowledging that and naming it is really, really powerful. And I've heard that over and over from people who are grieving, over and over. Building on that, this is the work of Alan Wolfelt again. He talks about the 11 tenets of companioning, which I'll send this as a handout to Lizzie. that companioning, we sometimes use the word being a Sherpa. I've been obsessed with watching everybody climb Mount Everest over the past 2 weeks, and they have Sherpas. I mean, it's amazing. And I never want to do it. Side note. But they have Sherpas, right? Nepali Sherpas who their bodies are acclimated to the environment and to the air, and they're strong and they know the way and they know what's dangerous and they know how to read the mountains and the terrain. And so they guide people up. They hold the bags, they carry the load. And that is sometimes what walking alongside someone who's grieving is it's holding the pain when it's too much for them to hold on their own. And then we give it back to them. I used the analogy the other day of like the red cap guys at Union Station. Like you need a cart to pull the baggage, right? You need the sky cap to come along and take your bags, but they're still yours. And so that's sometimes what we are, is we're a guide, we're a witness, we companion. And so he talks about that it's not about fixing, it's about listening and honoring and walking alongside and, being curious. I'm not an expert. I am not an expert. I know some stuff about grief, but I'm not the expert in your grief. And so together we can figure out what your grief looks like, what your path looks like. And so that requires somebody to walk alongside, somebody to show up. And we're going to talk about what that looks like to show up, right? And part of this, again, as I said at the beginning with William Wendt, is like, what do I say? How do I increase the comfort of myself to be able to step into the spaces? And here's my general rule of thumb: supportive statements never ever start with the words at least. At least they live a long life. At least they're no longer in pain. At least you got to be there. At least, fill in the blank. While some of that might be true, the word at least minimizes our impact, our grief. It says, because they are no longer in pain, you should be happy. Because they are no longer, you got to say goodbye, you should not be deeply grieving as you are. So at least tells us we should not be grieving. So here's what I do encourage people to say: drop the how are you, drop it. And you, those of you who go to Trader Joe's as your grocery store, they no longer say how are you at the checkout line. They say, did you find everything okay? To which my response is yes, and I found the brookie at the checkout line, which I didn't need and I bought anyway, so thank you. Right? But they say, did you find everything okay? Because that's a question I can answer, and that's an answer they can manage. Imagine if the checkout cashier asked everybody how they were doing and people honestly told them. Oh my gosh, that poor person would like run for the hills, right? So don't ask the question, how are you? Because it's too big, it's too vague. If you want to ask, how are you doing right now? How are you doing this morning? How are you doing with selling the house, with the estate, with the lawyers, with the banks? And quantify it, right? Put some boundaries around that question. Or just be like, it's really good to see you. I'm glad you're here. It's so good to see you over Zoom, over FaceTime, in person. I've been thinking about you, so I wanted to call, right? And then when somebody does share something with you, you don't have to have this huge response. Thank you for sharing that with me. That sounds really hard. This makes sense. Do you want to walk? We don't have to talk. We can just walk, right? You can send text messages to people with the expectation that they don't ever have to respond. I'm thinking of you. Heart, heart, heart. That's it. You don't have to respond, right? I just want you to know that I'm thinking of you. And so then we think about other ways to step in. One thing I will tell you that we do in American culture is we send food. We send a lot of food when somebody dies. So much food that the freezers get full. And so being able to, and it's a beautiful thing, right? Who wants to cook? But remember, the number one thing is that people have disrupted appetite. So perhaps this is when, Uber Eats or DoorDash or delivery comes into play, or somebody's organizing when things come in and breaking it into smaller portions so that they can be heated and there's not food waste. So you can, other ways to step in is organizing all of those calls and those donations and the things that people are offering up. But I encourage people when they're supporting those who are grieving to ask in a tangible way. here's three options. Like, I'm going to come over tonight. Do you want me to, clean your toilet, do your laundry, or clean out the refrigerator? I can do any of those things. And they might say, oh my gosh, clean my toilet. It hasn't been cleaned in like four weeks. Or they might say, actually, I'm good with that, but could you stop at the store and pick up a pint of milk? Right. So they know that you're willing to help. And that's really important. So giving those tangible things that you can do, rather than asking, how can I help? Because then I have to figure out, like, do you really mean it? Am I asking for too much? Am I going to be a burden? And I don't want to be a burden. So offering specific options, you could say, like, I'll stop by. I can clean your toilet. I can mow the lawn, or I can take out the trash. Or is there something else that might be helpful in that moment? Right. So, or I'm going to the grocery store. I'm going to pick up a few things and I'm going to leave them on your front steps. I'll ring the bell when I do it. You don't even have to answer the door. You can just pick up the groceries and go with it. Or I'm going to order Instacart and I'm going to have it delivered to you. I'll let you know when it's on the way, right? And then these are some other ways, right? Just being able to, the one on here that I will say I think is really important, well, all of them are important, but that I really want to highlight is to not forget, right? We often remember in this first year, or we remember in those first few weeks, and then we go back to business as usual. But usually around 6 weeks, 10 weeks, the support kind of dies off. And that's when our grief becomes very acute and palpable, and we can feel very alone. And so continue to check in, continue to send text messages, continue to remember. I have dates in my phone, and 15 years out, I'm texting people saying, I know I'm thinking of you today. I'm just sending you lots of love. And they'll be like, you're the only person who remembers. And I'm like, well, I don't remember. My phone remembers, So like put those dates in your phone because it's important that you continue to remember, right? People want their person and their grief to be remembered. And then these are some statements to avoid. Again, they might be okay for you, but they don't land well for everybody. So they're generally ones that we encourage people not to say. And again, these are just like in the video, these come from a good place. Like nobody's trying to cause harm, but we're trying to make the other person feel better because it's really uncomfortable for me to see somebody in pain. And I just want you happy because I love you and care about you. And so I'm going to say something that's going to try to take your pain away. And that's sometimes what these do is they're like platitudes, right? And these come from our clients. Our clients have told us that these have landed wrong, and the list is longer than this. And again, for you, maybe some of these do resonate, but they don't universally. So just tread lightly. Um, the only one I will name on here specifically is it's okay, don't cry. We've all said that to kids, to everybody. But when we say that, what we're saying is your tears aren't welcome and I can't handle it. And so instead, we might just want to say, your tears are welcome. I can see how painful this is. Yeah, we just take a breath and we just sit in it. It's hard, but we sit in it, right? Okay. And then the last couple of things here, just a few more slides, is I like to encourage people to think about when we're grieving, to think about our support network in these three buckets. One is our listeners. These are people who can listen without problem solving. Okay. These are folks who can hold the space and do what she was talking about in the video. And then we have our doers. These are people who are really good at problem solving. They're going to help you figure out, how to get to the bank, how to get the death certificate, how to call Social Security, how to change the deed into your name. They're going to do. And then there are distractors who kind of take our mind off things temporarily, whether it's let's go for a walk, let's go down to the water, let's go see the ducks at the duck pond in Southwest, let's, go out to the mountains, let's just go to the library, so they think about ways to distract you. If somebody falls into all three buckets, we need to tell them what we need from them. Well, I need you just to listen, or I need you to help me problem solve. I will tell you, this is a game changer with partners and with teenagers. So being able to say when your teenager or your teenage child or grandchild or niece or nephew is upset, do you need me just to listen or do you need me to help you problem solve? They'll be like, just listen, right? And okay, I can do that. Inevitably things shift to problem solving, but usually people just need to be heard and validated first. So find your people and know that like your partner, your lifelong partner might not be the listener, they might be the doer, right? Or they might be the listener and not the doer or not the distractor. So just thinking about who are the people in your bucket. And they might be people that you've met through the villages, right? Through your village. You might find somebody that you haven't known a long time, but they are your they're really good at listening. Okay. And then thinking about intentionally tending to yourself. Grief is dehydrating. Drink water. It's so important to drink water. When we get dehydrated, our system feels off and everything is hard and our underlying health conditions get exacerbated. Grief is dehydrating, tears are more dehydrating. So drink water. Rest. Get horizontal. I'm not talking about sleep, I'm talking about rest. You might need to take multiple lie downs during the day. So just know that when I say rest, I'm not saying go to sleep. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but I just want you to rest your body. And then these others kind of are just thinking through, setting boundaries. People might say to you, like, come over for dinner on Sunday. I know it's been a hard time. And while that invitation might be lovely, you might say, nope, I can't. I can't come over right now. Another time, thank you for your offer. It's very sweet, but I can't do it. Or, could you do this volunteer thing with me? Actually, right now, I'm feeling kind of at capacity. I can't do that. So setting boundaries is really important. David Kessler says no is a complete sentence, right? Like you don't need to offer any explanations. And then be gentle with yourself. That is something I tell people all the time is just be gentle. This is uncharted territory. You have never grieved this loss before. You've never grieved this person. And people will say, well, I'm 5 years out. Well, you've never been 5 years out of the death event from this person. So this is uncharted territory. So let's be gentle with ourselves and gentle with each other. There's no you should be at a certain point. I use the phrase, it's only been X number of days, X number of years. All right. And then finally, rituals. Rituals, it's like half of what Francis Weller wrote his book about that I'm so obsessed with. Rituals are so important. Rituals are part of grief because they provide a container. Rituals help us find a bottom for our feelings. He talks about how we often don't feel our feelings in grief because it feels like it's going to swallow us and consume us like that ocean. And rituals give us a container, a bottom, and some sides so we don't get swallowed by our emotions and our feelings. And so they also help us start to figure out what meaning means, what our continued bond, our continued relationship with this person is. A continued bond is the way we redefine and reestablish a relationship with somebody who's no longer physically present in our lives. And so think about rituals, and this could be a way that your village comes together. Maybe there's writing letters to the people who are newly bereaved. Maybe there's a grief mentoring program. Maybe you have a monthly kind of gathering where you light a candle and read a poem and sit in quiet meditation, remembering your person. Maybe you paint rocks and plant them around to bring about love and remember your person. Maybe you wear their color. Teenagers often mark the death of their loved one with they call them month anniversaries, where each month they mark the date. And so on that month, that day of the month, maybe you wear the color your person loved, or maybe you put their song on that you really enjoyed. Maybe you prepare a meal and you talk about the meal. So at a village, you could each bring a meal or a dish um, or something that your loved one loved to eat, and you talk about it and you share about why that loved one loved that and whether you loved it or hated it, right? Whether you enjoyed it or not. And so finding ways to incorporate your loved one into your life and honoring them and sharing that. We like to talk about our people. So asking about your person, I didn't know so and so. Tell me about them. What did you love about them? What did you hate about them? How did you meet? What's the best gift they gave you? What's the worst gift they gave you? What song did they like? What was their worst habit? How were they as a driver? Like, there's lots of ways to get to know your person because your person is more than how they died. Your person is sometimes decades long stories in your life. Sometimes it's shorter amounts of time. But rituals allow us to bring this person with us. Okay. And then here's the last thing before I give you the books. This is, I find this really helpful to narrow our focus. So, when somebody dies or when something significant happens, like a retirement or transitioning to different living situations, we often think about the totality of our experience. How am I going to live the rest of my life without this person? How am I going to survive this? And I tell people we don't have to figure that out. We need to figure out, how am I going to get through the next 60 seconds? How am I going to get through the next 5 minutes? What does getting through today mean? What do I need to make today manageable? What do I need to comfort myself for the next 5 minutes? We don't have to figure out the next year, 5 years, 10 years right now. We have to figure out what's right in front of us. And so I call that kind of dosing and narrowing your focus. We don't have to, we can just shift it down. That's a peephole, right? Which narrows the focus when you look out a door. And then asking yourself, is this helpful or is this harmful? Is looking at these pictures hurting me right now or is it helpful? And if it's not helping, don't do it. You'll come back to it. It doesn't mean you don't do it forever. It just means in this moment it's not helping, and it might later on. So, questions you can reflect and ask yourself. Okay. These are some of the books that I love. So yeah, again, you're going to get this slide, so you'll get the list. They're all available at your local bookstore. And they're at the library. They're on Libby. You can get them electronically on a Kindle, or you can get them from the stacks. I know they're all at the MLK library in particular. So great books and good books to have conversations about, right? So each of them fits a different niche. And then again, we're here to support. But I think what's so beautiful about the villages is you have this natural community, and that's what grief is. We're designed to live in community, and so there's this community where people can show up and have these hard conversations and sit in it with no solutions, but we can remember and we can honor and we can connect because it is really it's a universal experience, but it's an individual experience as well. So I'm going to pause. I got 2 minutes, Lizzie.